What does it mean to have a brand voice? Because if someone tells me one more time to just be authentic, I just might scream. And then, how do you use that brand voice to build trust and stand out in a crowded market? And then, how can I sell things without being pushy, or worse, without oversharing? Because the internet is oversharing right now. Listen, as I always say, I know what I know, and I don't know what I don't know. And when I don't know something, I'm going to find the person that does know it. So, I'm going to introduce you to a woman of many words. This is your sneak peek into my coffee chat with a Hallmark writer. Yes, the Christmas movies. A licensed lawyer. She passed the bar and everything because why not get all the degrees and certifications and licensings that are available to us? And a human focused woman of color business owner. She's telling us why our messaging might sound like everybody else's chat GPT bot, or people really like the content that we're putting out, but is not converting. Grab a mug. We're having a coffee chat. First off, let me introduce you to Justine Wentzell-Chang. This is our messaging strategist, our copywriter, a founder of Red Balloon Station, which is based off of a French movie, apparently. A former entertainment industry pro. I already told you she wrote for Hallmark and helped sell a lot of different stories within the entertainment space. A licensed attorney who went to law school but doesn't practice law, but she never planned on practicing law. She just really wanted to sharpen her thinking. A country music lover. If you don't know, I love country music and I love another person that loves country music, but I'll get back to that in just a little bit. She's a proud eldest daughter and a deep believer in the power of words as tools for connection, for communication, and business.
I'm a messaging strategist and copywriter for specifically equity driven and social impact driven women of color entrepreneurs. And I work with them on creating and defining their brand voice, making sure their copy and messaging aligns with that brand voice in the most authentic and genuine way, because we want to make sure we stand out and not blend into the rest of the crowd, because there's so many women doing such incredible work.
So throughout my conversation with Justine, there's an overarching like four things that I really want us to delve into that I think will be helpful for us in our business, in our messaging, in our copy for our website, our emails, the whole shebang. And I really want to dive into those and frame this conversation a little bit for you. She and I had our giggles and our back and forth. The young people are saying that our kiki back and forth. So I needed to create a little bit more structure around our conversation as the true podcast person that I am. So I'm going to walk you through the four big things that I'm sure that at least I took away that will change the way that you talk about your business, change the way that you're connecting with your ideal client, and how your ideal client is connecting with you, all from Justine's messaging expertise. First off, we need to understand that our brand voice is not just how we sound, but it's also how our audience experiences our business. Think Chick-fil-A. We all have a very specific experience with Chick-fil-A. And even post pandemic, the customer service started to change a little bit. So it's kind of thrown us off quite a bit. Starbucks, same thing. I believe I mentioned in our conversation something about Target and the weightlessness of the carts and the smell of coffee. It all plays a role in how our end client, our end user, are experiencing our offerings and our business. Justine breaks down the difference between your brand voice and your speaking voice, because I don't know about you, but it's hard for me to understand that not all the time is our brand voice the same thing as our speaking voice. Most times they're kind of different, in the same way that we think of the way you would talk in a job interview is not the same way you would talk to your girlfriends at brunch.
It's creating that relatability. And that's why storytelling is so powerful, being authentic. And I know we hear the word authentic so much now, and to a point where sometimes I wonder if some people are actually being authentic, but it's finding that you, right? And like, I mentioned brand voice earlier, and a lot of folks, especially the ones I work with, like we are our brands essentially, right? So a lot of folks default to thinking my brand voice is my voice. But that's true and not true at the same time. Because if you think about like in general how we speak, our voices are dynamic, right? Depending on where we are, who we're talking to, our voice or how we speak, the language we use might shift a little, right? It's still us, it's still genuinely us, but it might shift a little. Like like the easiest examples are like when you go to work or like your job interview or whatever, you put on a little more like professional sounding professional sounding voice and image, right? And then when you're with your girlfriends, you're like way more laid back and you're unfiltered, right? You can let out all your anger, let out all your frustrations, and it's all good. I wouldn't necessarily say that like professional you is not you. Like it's a side of you, right? We're all human, so we're all really dynamic. And your brand voice is how you want others to perceive your brand.
There's always some difference in tone, in language, in values that shape the way that we are trying to get people to perceive us at the end of the day and perceive our business. Then she mentioned something about our brand archetypes. And if you recall a previous episode where I mentioned kind of the personalities that encompass a podcast host, this is fairly similar to this. It's the vibe you bring to the place, to the space for your customer. This archetype doesn't technically really change. It just is a guiding force for how people understand who you are and how to connect with you.
It depends on what your brand is. Like, so one way we do this work specifically is we always start out with first knowing your core values, but then also determining what your brand archetype is, but also your ideal audience's archetype. And your brand archetype is super important because that does not change. It shouldn't. It's like who you are at your core. Um, and so, as an example, I can give, I have a client who her brand archetype is a caregiving sage, right? She comes from a teaching background, educational background. And when I was working with her on her copy, all of it sounded very like corporate, like, and very, she's an educator, so it's very smart, right? And it's fluffy words again, like it sounds good on its face, but what does it really mean and how does it really connect? So we were working on a project for her, building out an email sequence for something, and I kept telling her, you need to lean more into your caregiver side because, um, first of all, you're speaking to other educators are getting inundated with information every day too, right? Make it easy for them to understand. To like write it how you just told me, right? Um, and so bringing out the right sides of their archetype, depending on the project too, where you might lean heavily. But we all have like a core like archetype of who we are.
A lot of us here are women in business, and one of the natural tones and one of the natural archetypes that we fall into is the caregiver archetype. And when I first heard her say this, I thought about automatically like the idea of being like nursing somebody into something or teaching somebody into something. But not all of us want to be nurturing to that degree, or not all of us want to be teaching someone how to do our thing. For me, all of the things that I do are very done for you experiences. You show up, you're the talent, and that's it. I do everything else. So I'm not necessarily teaching you anything. However, there is a different way to engage with being the caregiver archetype.
for example, caregivers are very nurturing, right? And generally seen as like softer, more approachable. Although I always remind my caregivers that caregiving can also be tough love. So there's different ways to to show caregiving, right? Um, but like I have one friend who I did a little work with, and she naturally she like when you know her and she speaks to you like a big sister. Like she very much is a caregiver, right? And we talked about her archetype, and she had done some work with someone before, and she said, "No, the other person said the same thing, but I don't want to lean into the caregiver because then oh, I'm forgetting exactly what she said, but it was like attracting the wrong audience for her because it was like her brand is very bold. It's very she's a DEI consultant. So it's very bold, very like fiery. She is like no BS. Like she's been removed from LinkedIn for some of her posts, not because she's saying anything bad, but more because it's more of the political climate, you know. But she won't filter things, and that's the energy her brand brings, which is like it's so powerful, and it is how her brand should be, right? So like it, and it's very authentic to like the work she does and who she is as that brand. Um, but like if she brings in the caregiving side, it softens it, and then she winds up like having to sort of babysit a lot of her clients, is what she said. Whereas like that's not who she wants. She doesn't want to babysit people. She's not here to like get them to the emotional intelligence level they need to be. She needs them to come ready to do work, right?
And then once you've figured out that brand voice, that brand archetype, how do you connect that to your messaging and your values that are already existing in the first place? One of the perfect examples that Justine gave us was she really is rooted in positivity. One of her business's core values is positivity. And at the same time, one of the things that she talks about a lot, and one of the things that her clients really connect with, is being equity driven, being community driven, being women of color. And sometimes the experiences that come along with that aren't inherently positive. When you think about being a woman of color in business, being a woman of color at all, they're not inherently positive. So she's made it so specific and so intentional that with her brand voice of being a version of the caregiver, a version of the big sister, she still makes sure that it aligns with being positive.
One example I can give is for myself, like I try to always lead with positivity. It's one of our core values at Red Balloon Station is positivity. And so I try to remember to make sure I check my copy and messaging and make sure it doesn't sound too negative, because sometimes when we're dealing with real world topics, with current events or issues, those things can get heavy, right? And if I'm just talking to my girlfriends, again, I'm unfiltered, and it might be a lot of heavy stuff and like just like laying out all my emotions. But that's not necessarily appropriate for my brand. There's a way to be real about the same topics, but again, like um, address it from a different angle.
A really good example of this is everything that's happening in LA, and Justine is based out of LA, or California, I believe, in general. Talking about protests is not is not a great thing, but she's found incredibly interesting ways to weave that experience into her branding. I remember seeing a LinkedIn post where she talked about that and how the way that we choose our words are so powerful. How we choose our words are so powerful because it truly shapes history. It shapes how people perceive experiences. The difference between a protest and a riot, completely different experience, completely different understanding of what's happening when you shape the story that way. For the people listening on audio, I'll include the link to that exact post in the description. So now that we've gathered some version of understanding that our brand voice is not just how we sound, it's really the feeling, the experience that we're crafting for people. Think Tiffany and Co, Target, Chick-fil-A, Starbucks. Now the next thing is, the goal of great copy isn't to sound clever. Now, I harp on this a lot, especially as someone that does podcast search engine optimization, where we want to be found. And sometimes the way to be found is to be simplistic. Sometimes the way to be found is to be very straightforward, very clear, very communicative. So, Justine says, to be clear, specific, and persuasive, not pushy, persuasive, is more important than being clever.
It's like fluffy words that sound really good, like on its face, and you'll probably even get folks who are like, "Oh, well, that's interesting." But then once they're there with you, they don't really like get what you do, you know? So it's me taking those beautiful fluffy words and giving them more purpose, more clarity, more specificity. I was thinking about country music. I have a really deep love for country music. And I just love that like country music at its best is storytelling and it's truth telling. And what's great about the storytelling in country music is that it's so specific. Like when you hear a song, whether it's like a heartbreak song, a cheating song, or just a fun bar song, you can picture yourself in that bar. You can picture yourself in that relationship because you know that feeling, like you know it so clearly. That's what we need in really effective, impactful copywriting and messaging, especially for those doing work that is meant to really uplift their communities or other communities.
I recall working with in the earlier years of what I do, I recall working with a woman who, her emails were so good. The open rate was so good. People loved the content that she was putting out. However, it didn't convert to sales all that well. And I'm sure that in some variation of our business journey, we can all empathize with this, where we're using what Justine calls fluffy language, where it feels good, it feels nice, but it doesn't drive people to action. So, how do you get people to move away from that fluffy language and actually create meaning behind it?
You need to like to be able to connect with people, you need to just really be able to like I used to describe it as like when Celine Dion sings like an amazing note and it just like pierces your soul, like you need that kind of connection, right?
And even guide them through step-by-step instructions of, what does it look like to work with you next? What has this look like for other people? What's that buy now, I can't live without it energy that you're trying to cultivate within your copy, whether that's your website or your email?
You don't want to be pushy. I know many of us were like, "Oh, I hate selling because I don't want to be pushy and I don't want to be annoying." But through storytelling and really strategic, persuasive messaging, again, persuasive, not pushy, um, that's how we connect with people and that's how we sell. If you think of a sales funnel, for example, the top of the funnel is awareness, right? It's the just, hey, I'm here. This is me. This is what I do. Letting people know you. But slowly, as you go down the funnel, you are connecting with them on a deeper level and you're getting them to the sell, right? So it's taking them gradually through an experience, like on a journey with you. It's about building the relationship. Like when I think of pushy sales, like very like sales bro-y tactics, it's just like buy this, buy now, like and there's no real sort of relationship building.
Then, number three, of course, we talked a little bit about artificial intelligence, AI. And the main takeaway that I received from Justine was, AI is not our biggest enemy. It's not the tool that we think that we need to be fighting against. Instead, perhaps we should be working to use AI more as a research tool, more as a way to do things a little bit faster. Can I read this transcript a little bit faster? Can I summarize this document a little bit faster? Whatever that thing is, we can use it for that aspect. However, AI doesn't offer the nuance and the cultural relevance and the um, authenticity, as much as we hate hearing the word authenticity right now, the emotional intelligence that goes into our brand story, our personal story, our messaging. AI can't put that in there. For me, for example, I love a good 90s and early 2000s, really it's early 2000s, um, GIFs in my emails. And that seems to warrant a good amount of engagement. Almost anything that you see, I'm going to create some kind of funny thing in there, cuz a value of mine is if it's not fun, I don't want to be doing it. Not everything has to be fun. It's business at the end of the day. However, at its core, if it's not fun, I don't want to be doing it. But AI can't tell me, "Oh, let me bring up this Clueless meme," or oh, maybe the audience will connect with this Seinfeld meme. Although I wasn't really a huge fan of Seinfeld, I haven't gotten back into that. But Gilmore Girls or Desperate Housewives, all these things that people can connect with, that AI doesn't have the emotional intelligence and the cultural relevance and the nuance in order to put into play. So this last one was a little tricky for me to understand. Hear me out. I feel like we consistently get the feedback that we need to be telling our story in our social media content, in our email content, in our all the things. We need to be People connect with people, not businesses. People connect with transformations and connections and all these other things, not this concept and idea, not this service, not this product, right? Well, how do you do that while acknowledging the feedback that Justine gave us with you're not the main character in your brand story, your audience is. Yes, it's about you. Yes, I can tell you my story of starting podcasting. Yes, I can tell you my story of really wanting to support a specific demographic because it aligns with my upbringing. Cool. But it's not really about me. It's about the change that I have the capacity to support other women in business with. It's about the stories that I have the opportunity to platform within the podcast industry. It's not about us. So, constantly thinking of shifting your language and unpacking your story from the lens of a client, an ideal client, a target client, is really the goal here. We want to be able to say, okay, I had this experience, but where can my ideal person see themselves in this experience? And then finally, oversharing is kind of given vampire energy. I think, again, in the name of us wanting to share ourselves and our personal brand and connecting with people, we run the risk of oversharing. We run the risk of sharing. I think, personally, I would say oversharing is sharing things that don't tie back or align with the offer that you have.
We are now in a world where I think sometimes we overshare in storytelling, right? We kind of try to share every little thing about our lives, which I don't feel is necessary. We've forgotten that in business, in our brand storytelling, we are not the main character. Our audience is. So you need to center your audience in the story, even if it's your story. Remember to not make it all about you. You'll hear me say this every now and then, but like what happens when we are constantly just talking about ourselves is that we start producing vampire energy, is what I call it, where it's like me, right? And like people will like it because they're like, oh, she's sharing a vulnerable story, so I'm supposed to like it. Do they really actually care? I don't know. They appreciate the vulnerability, right? But are they really seeing the value in it for them? Like, you almost have to think too that people tend to be selfish to a certain extent. Like, you know how we're always like worried about how we look and stuff, like even on Zoom, right? A lot of us are looking at ourselves on Zoom, right? Like making sure it's like we're good, like do I look weird? You know? We are paying attention to ourselves more, right? So that's what we need to remember when we are storytelling, even when it's our own story. How does my audience fit into this? Going back to country music, right? You may not have experienced that specific situation, but you can relate to that feeling, right? And when it's so specific and your audience can see themselves in it because you're speaking specifically to their emotion or to their situation, it depends. Like, you can bring someone in different ways. Like if your mom relating to like just the chaos of like, I don't know, morning rush and like something I recently was connecting with on other mothers on was like working in the margins, right? Actually, the person who brought it up is not a mother. I was having this conversation last week with with a group of women of color entrepreneurs that I'm in a community with. And one of them brought up working in the margins, and she's not a mother, but like I related to that so much. And I like the other moms in the group were also relating to that because like we wind up having to work like after bedtime, right? Or like for whatever reason, she's also working like morning or night. Me, I don't get the mornings because I have to do school drop off. But like it's again those specific details that can like paint a picture.
People don't necessarily need to know what I have for breakfast every day if it doesn't tie back into the problem that I'm solving, the experience that I'm crafting. Yeah, sometimes it's okay to be like, hey, I'm finally on vacation. I'm experiencing this thing. Look at it from this lens. But consistently looking again at your posts, at your copy, at your messaging from the lens of how can someone else see themselves in this picture, in this story, in this whatever it is. And oversharing kind of it centers you from like that me energy, and it doesn't offer people an opportunity to really connect and understand how to engage with you. It's kind of lame. So overall, my big takeaways from my conversation with Justine was one, your brand voice is not just how you sound, it's the experience that you're crafting. When I think of being super specific about my speaking voice versus my brand voice, I honestly automatically think of Paris Hilton. Okay. So as soon as I said her name, you heard her voice in your head, I'm sure. And if you didn't, I don't know what generation you're part of, but this might not be the show for you. But we know that Paris Hilton doesn't talk like that from day to day, but it's connected to her story. We know that she may wear something outside of pink, but it's connected to her brand story. And it helps other people be able to identify, oh, that's Paris Hilton. Oh, that's her. Two, the goal of great copy is not to sound clever, but to be clear, specific, and persuasive. Not pushy, persuasive. And three, AI does not and probably will never, fingers crossed, probably will never have the nuance and the cultural experience that you have to be able to truly connect with your audience. And then finally, four, you're not the main character, even though we love you, even though you're great, you're not the main character of the story. Your audience is. Now that we have all of our brand messaging juices going, I'm gonna leave you off on our faith note. And for those that have never tuned into a episode of Coffee Chats podcast, the the basis of this faith note is based in Matthew 17:20, and that's a scripture that the business behind this podcast and this podcast is based off of. Matthew 17:20 essentially says, if you have faith of even just a mustard seed, you can tell that mountain to move from here to there, and it will. And we know, I know, you know, we know, it takes a whole lot of faith to be a business owner, to be human, but specifically to be a business owner. But if we have the faith of a mustard seed, we can move forward. So every episode, I always ask, either I lead the faith note or I ask the guest to lead the faith note. And Justine's faith note is built around the idea that everything happens in good time, in the right time, in the way it is meant to be.
When we're thinking about our businesses, sometimes we're hustling, right? Last year was probably like the top 3 toughest years of my life. My partner lost his job at the same time I found out I was pregnant again. It was so hard, but I remember being in a place thinking like, I need to hustle more. I need more clients or bigger paying clients. I might need to get a job, right? I've seen this over and over in my life and like witnessing it in close ones' lives too, where like sometimes you just really want something and God will give it to you. Um, but not always in the way you expect it. And sometimes he'll give it to you as you asked, and it'll be a really hard lesson to learn. But you asked for it and you've got to learn the lesson, right? So yeah, so that's my faith note, which is just like sometimes we just need to really trust in sort of divine timing, I guess. Still got to put in work. Yeah, put in the work and trust your gut, but like everything works out as it should be.
This made me think of the Bible scripture, Ecclesiastes 3, verse 1 through 11. I'm going to read that to you. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. What do workers gain from their toil? And toil in this sense means hard work. What do workers gain from their hard work? I have seen the burden God has laid on the human race. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I don't think that needs anything else between what Justine has said and the scripture itself. Thank you so much for listening in. I will talk to you next time. Bye. You've been listening to Coffee Chats podcast from iMoves Management, a marketing agency serving small business owners. This episode was written, hosted, produced, and edited by me, Tahjma VanBuren. If you want to learn more about anything you heard on the show, schedule your coffee chat using the link in the description. We'll talk all things podcasting and how to use it as a true marketing strategy for you and your small business. Go to iMovesmanagement.com for further information. Thank you to our listeners for supporting the show. Bye.